I solemnly swear that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Hey everybody, it's Ron from The Truth About Addiction. We have a beautiful guest here today, the beautiful Edan McGovern. Hi Edan, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Edan, my pleasure, darling. Edan's a survivor of a parent that was in active addiction through most of her life, and she's got a really special story. Her dad was a friend of mine, and also Edan's mother has children to me. So, we're a close family, but so all right, Edie, you can do your bit, sweetheart.
My bit, oh gosh, where to start with Dad? So Dad was a drug addict for long before I was born. I'm pretty sure you might know a lot more than I do, because who knows what came out of Marty's mouth and how close to real life it is. So I know about 40 different versions of similar stories, but I believe he was using drugs basically from around his 20s onwards, on and off, in and out of 12-step programs, all of, in and out of rehabs, into jail briefly. Well, not that brief, but not too long.
It wasn't that brief.
Then when I was born, sort of a similar story, and sort of throughout my entire life, it was that there were times where he was completely clean for a while. There were times where he was definitely using when I was in his custody. And it was a very tricky journey. Obviously, as you know, addicts are very good at covering up things. They're very good at lying until they're not, until, their brain is sort of crumbling so much that they can't, uphold this huge web of who have I told what to, and what timeline, how long have I told you I've been clean for, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
your dad was pretty good at twisting the truth. God love him.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to tell what's the part of his personality that was an addict and what was him, because I'm pretty sure what was actually him was just an amazing storyteller anyway.
Yeah.
Dad
100%.
If you didn't even really have to talk to him, you just left him for long enough and he'd start having a conversation with himself, with anyone. At the bus stop, someone would be there for an hour, stuck, talking, but then eventually really listening to this guy that at first looked like a crazy homeless man. And then they're enraptured in this story, being like, I'll never forget this. I remember being at the bus being like, Dad, I have to go to school. But you got to stop telling your life story to, someone with a full, all their shopping bags with them, that they want to go home. So yeah, he's quite an illustrated storyteller, but it definitely...
He was.
Yeah.
It's a shame he never wrote a book, to be quite honest.
He said he did write a book when he was in jail. I take everything he ever said with a big packet of salt. But the thing about him was, it's there's so many lies and so much truth. Anything he says, the craziest things he's ever said, could also be true. So yeah, apparently he did write a book once, and he used to make me little storybooks. He'd print out photos of us, and any day we'd have out together, he'd make into a children's book for me. I've still got a bunch of them because he had them at his house, at his last house he ever lived in.
Yeah, cool.
Which is pretty special.
Yeah, right. So what age did you realise that Dad was a bit different to everybody else's?
Oh, pretty early. I always knew that there was something up. I think I grew up very, very early, because I remember being maybe 4 or 5 and knowing that there was a difference between sometimes when Dad was doing well and we were allowed to have a day out together, just the two of us, and maybe when he wasn't, and he'd have to come see me at my grandparents' or at my older sister's house, or that was the sort of time I'd get to spend with him, and he wouldn't have a lot of independence for some reason, and I sort of just cottoned on. Also, my dad had no filter about what you shouldn't tell an extremely young child, so he just flat out told me. I think I was probably about 5 when he was like, I was a drug addict for many years. He told me everything, his experience in like, a life of crime. I knew the ins and outs of heroin addiction, in early primary school, which is crazy to think of now because when you're that young, you don't know that you're young. You always think you're old enough to hear something. So I was just like, yeah, okay, I get it. And he'd say things like, Edie, I know you understand it when I say this. Looking back, I'm like, that's a 7-year-old. I've explained withdrawal symptoms too. She doesn't understand it. She's going to try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, okay, all right. I sort of throughout the years, there were times when I would start piecing things together. Like, from everything he told me, he'd always talked about it being in the past, when before I was born. And then I'd go to meetings with him. I'd be sitting in the room. If I was 7 years old, I'd say, hi, I'm Eden. I've been clean for 7 years. And I remember one day I heard him say, like 3 months or something. And I was like, what? And in the car ride home, I said, why did you say that? And, the panicking, this busted talking, you can feel his heart rate in his mouth, basically. And even at that age, I remember just being like, okay, all right, whatever. And just sort of like acceptance of this is going to happen. This is always a possibility. When I think I would have been about 8 or 9, we were down for a trip in his hometown, Albury Wodonga, where I was meeting some of my aunties for the first time. And I remember he was saying his whole leg had blown up to like double its size. It was all super infected. He said it happened from a spider bite. I don't know how it happened. There's always
shooting up in his legs. That's how it happened.
Yeah, exactly. And it got super infected. One day I woke up, we were staying at his friend Neil's house. Did you ever meet Neil?
Yeah.
I woke up one night and Neil said, like, your dad's in hospital. You're just going to have to stay here with me for a minute and then we'll go see him in the morning. And then we went and saw him in the morning and they were basically, it's really interesting. Like, you don't realize kids know exactly what you're talking about a lot of the time because, doctors talking in codes around me. I was like, oh, they're saying he's not going to make it. And I was like, okay. So I flew back to Sydney on my own. Then I think he was in basically a coma for about 6 months or something at St. Vincent's Hospital. I went every day after school to see him, most days anyway. The odds were not in anyone's favor. I remember like his sisters from, his country hometown were trying to bring a priest in and we were all like, he's not religious. Also, jumping the gun a bit here, come on, he might make it. Like, my favorite thing to say about Dad is always that once I saw a spider bite him and then it died.
Yeah.
Like, whatever's happening inside him is going to overpower modern medicine. He's a pretty tough unit. He should have been dead a long time before he was, with what he was doing to his body. So I sort of had a grain of hope, being like, I think he's too stubborn to go. I think this man might have so many more words to say, so much more to annoy me, that he will fight off death. And he did. After months, I remember I went into the hospital one day and he was sitting up. And that was groundbreaking. I was like crying my eyes out because he was up in a chair. And he had about like 50 different tubes in him. Like one, down his throat, everywhere. Like I just never seen someone with so many tubes. And then it was months later, he sort of regained proper consciousness. I'm not sure what happened to him when he was in the coma, but I'm pretty sure it was pretty scary because he was pretty delusional for a while coming out of it. He would always tell me that he would have like visions and sort of delusions that he would look outside the window and I would be like outside at night in the cold, which obviously wasn't happening. I was with my mum. I was fine. He said it was like one of the scariest things of his life. It was really, like awful, the things that he was seeing, and he couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. And then for a certain amount of time, every time I'd come in, he'd say like, you never came to visit me. I was like, Dad, I've been here every day for months. what do you mean? So yeah, it was pretty awful. But then he made a recovery. He, it's again, it's one of those things. Like, now that I'm my age, I'm 23 now. I look back at so many things that, you know, as an adult, and I go, oh, that was crazy that happened. Obviously, after he came out, then I think he was on methadone, because we go to the methadone clinic near St. Vincent's.
Yep.
And then he'd drive home. And I remembered, like, a lot of the time at the wheel, he'd be like, Edie, I'm going to teach you to drive. Because he had, like, a manual car that was literally falling apart. We had to hold the roof up sometimes. I was like, this is cool. Dad's letting me drive. He thinks I'm clever enough to drive. And I realized it's because he's got, like, one eye open at the wheel. I was like, oh, you need me to drive.
Yep.
I look back at it now and I'm like, wow. I never questioned how much my dad loved me. He loved me. He was, like, painstakingly in love with being my dad. And it did not matter. Because he wanted to see me so badly and was so sick because of addiction and, you know, various other mental health stuff he had. I'll get into it later, but he got diagnosed with bipolar in the last year of his life, which is ironic and kind of frustrating that it happened so late. But yeah, he just wanted to spend time with me so badly that he didn't realize he's completely putting both of us in danger, which is probably the most upsetting thing about addiction, and what I had to work on for so many years. You know, like, the first big thing I ever had to really overcome was obviously what a lot of family members, and especially children of addicts, go through, is this feeling of, like, why isn't it enough for you to overcome this? Like, why don't you love me enough? Or, like, what am I not doing enough of that's going to cause you to take some action and change this? And then it's it's like a very upsetting, very disappointing, but very freeing knowledge to know that it's out of your hands. It's out of their hands a lot of the time.
Yep.
I mean, it is possible. People do it, and it's incredible, but it is not something to take personally. If someone is choosing drugs over you, it's chemical.
They don't have a choice sometimes.
And it's biological.
Yeah. It's a horrible disease, this addiction.
Yeah. And it was a crazy thing. I did some research 2 years ago, because I was writing a lot about, after he died, I wrote a lot of stand-up comedy about him, because it helped me sort of grieve and make sense of the things that didn't make sense at all, and things that felt very unfair and ridiculous. I found writing, you know, comedy and taking that approach to it was really helpful to me, but I also wrote a lot of music about him. And so I was doing a lot of research and sort of about, like, the genetic predisposition to addiction, which is terrifying to read, that, you know, children of addicts are so much more likely to become addicts themselves. And I was like, whoa. And I was freaking out. And then I was like, wait. I was like, what if I'm a drug addict? I'm like, Eden, you're not on heroin. It's fine. You're not. I don't know why I'm freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh, what if I'm a heroin addict? Yeah, you're not. It's okay. But
yeah, just now.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's terrifying statistics to come across, I think.
Your statistics are really good, but they're not valid because, as you know, I have twin daughters. One's in recovery, one's not. So, you know, we can't say, oh, it's because of your upbringing, it's because of your social upbringing or your standard or what you learned as a child, because I have twins, both grew up in the same house, both went to the same schools, both had the same parents, and one suffers with the disease, one doesn't. The other's got mental health issues.
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to the type of person. It's really interesting growing up around addicts, almost like meeting them. I'm sure you can understand. You meet people in real life, and before they say anything, like, you can just pick it. You're like, oh, you've got that.
100%.
You're in that world, aren't you? Even if someone doesn't, like,
you've got the ism.
Even if they're not at that time currently in active addiction with anything, if they've just got the susceptibility to it, it's a spooky sense that you just can feel it in someone. You're like, oh yeah, you've got it. It's lying dormant in you somewhere. It's a particular type of person that you can just tell. You're like, yeah, you could one day struggle with it, or you probably struggle with it.
Or in another area of their life, it could be food, could be sex, could be gambling, could be shopping, could be
just the addictive personality for sure.
Angle.
For sure, like in whatever it is. That was like a big thing to figure out for me, is it's not going to present in everyone the same at all. And in some, like, I think there is a lot of damage control that can be done. Some people have it in ways that maybe aren't going to affect their health as much as some ways. Not everyone's going to, be physically doing to their body what, illicit drugs do. But even with me, I found like just personality traits that Dad had would happen in me with ways that weren't, as unhealthy as drugs, but it was things like my approach to working and performing a lot of the time is I'm like, oh, I sound like an addict. 2 days ago, I was like, oh, I wanted to do, I think, like 50 stand-up comedy gigs this year, and it's June, and I think I've had 40, which means I could do 100. And I was like, God, like, well, you don't have to. It's very, very obsessive. And I was like, wow, it's like, even though I'm not going off the rails in one way, it's like, you just have to always keep tabs on, like, there's always that part of me, the like satiable part of you there.
Yeah. Must make it hard for you to get boyfriends too, because you see a guy and you think, you're fucked. You got the isms, buddy.
Absolutely. Definitely. It also made it definitely hard to be in relationships with anyone in my early 20s when it happened. Yeah, Dad died when I was 2017, so I was 19 years old. A lot of my friends are recreationally using drugs, maybe not in a way that's ever going to end their life, but it was so hard to be around because I was like just associating it with the thing that just took down my favorite person in the entire world.
Yep.
And I was so probably difficult to be around for a long time because I just was angry at drugs in general.
Yeah.
Which is hard.
I remember when you were a little kid, I'd come to visit and Dad would make promises he was going to pick you up and then he couldn't turn up because of the dirty disease taking control over him. And I just used to see the devastation. And I just think, fuck, I hate this disease. I hate this disease.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's also the feeling that, because I hid secrets for Dad a lot because because I loved him, because he was so much fun, because he was the type of parent, the mental illness in him was also what made him awesome. As an 8-year-old, to have a dad that will wake up and you go, I don't want to go to school. And he'll go, okay, I know a good park in Canberra. Let's go. And you go, yeah, let's go. Let's go to Canberra. And he just would. That was awesome. He'd be like, where do you want to go? Let's go to the aquarium. And I knew we had $15 and he'd just make it happen somehow. Yeah. Talk his way out of something, borrow money from someone, do something. I definitely turned a blind eye to probably some dodgy things when it came to like, I really want this toy.
Yeah, right.
I remember we'd be in Toys R Us and I'd say like, I want this. And he'd say, if you let me go back to a life of crime, I could get you that. And I'd be like, no, I don't want the toy that bad. It's just crazy that he left it up to me.
Yeah.
Literally.
He wanted a responsible addict. He wanted a responsible adult to make the decision.
I was like the adult out of both of us so many times. So yeah, I hid a lot for him. Even if I knew he was using, I turned a blind eye. I didn't mention it to my mom because obviously whenever she cottoned on to the fact that was happening, I was out of there for basically until he was clean for a long time.
Yeah, you'd be banned. You're not seeing your father.
No,
that's it.
Because it's just not a safe environment for me to be in, or I'd have to go back to very controlled time with him, around other family members, which was fine. But I did love the freedom of him, like of living with him, even though it was quite volatile, quite, aside from addiction, Dad had a lot of, mental illness that made it quite a volatile situation. But I just unconditionally loved him. And so, yeah, a lot of the times when I'd find substances, when I'd hear people say something in front of me they weren't supposed to say, I'd just listen to the stream of lies that had come out of his mouth and just smile and nod and be like, okay. It was an interesting thing to go through.
Did you remember when Dad would ever take you to school or pick you up?
A lot.
That would have been comical.
I remember, like, even if, trying to live a normal life with someone who is not living a normal life is insane. He'd be like, you can have your friends over here after school. Like, if I ever did, it was on the way home, I'd be saying, listen, my dad's not like other dads. He's a bit weird. He might say weird things. He looks a bit weird. He looks a bit crazy. I don't know if he looks like a homeless, but he's gluing his teeth back in with super glue. You have to ignore him. And these school kids from the eastern suburbs were like, what?
God.
You can't say that. What do you mean? So it was very much like, ugh, I don't want him to say anything in front of them. I don't want their parents to pick their kids up and know, because it was this knowledge that everyone knows. If I was at after school care and he hadn't turned up and I'm just sitting with some, kid in their 20s and he's going to turn up, I'm going to like, oh, as soon as he turns up, you're going to see how he's acting and you're an adult, so you know what drugs are. And then you're going to know. So...
He'd have his glasses on his nose.
He'd have all these ridiculous... Like, the way he would go about, he'd have some, like, old scarf wrapped around his head or something. I'd be like, what's going on?
The glasses used to get me. The glasses on the tip of the nose,
right, the tip
down
of the
here.
nose.
You like that, and then looking over the top of the glasses at you, no, mate, I'm not using anymore, brother. No, mate. Yeah. Oh God, it was quite loving actually.
Yeah.
But one thing about him, I knew he was doing the best he could. He was trying to do the best dad he could, because he wasn't dad material, but he was doing the best he could. He loved you immensely. I know that, because we were pretty close. We had a common denominator in your mother, and we also had a common denominator of our addictions and our mental illnesses. And he grew up completely different to me, as you know. He come from a decent family, and I just remember just watching him going through the pain, like going, I just don't want to do this to me kid, I have all this good intention, but the powerlessness of that disease was just so strong in him, Well, hence, he died at nearly 70 years of age, still using. Not many junkies get to 70. That's tenacity.
That's commitment.
That's
yeah.
Oh, mate, yeah. That's
no one's ever
right?
met a 70-year-old junkie. It just doesn't happen. Ridiculous.
Heroin. Come on,
like,
man.
if it wasn't heartbreaking, it'd be quite impressive. I was like, my God, your body will do anything.
Exactly. Oh, mate.
Yeah.
As
when
you
he
said
died,
before, something that bought him and died.
When he died, I remember being like, oh God, like, only when they said it did I realize. I was like, I've been expecting this visit for years.
Yeah.
Years and years and years. And I think that was probably the hardest thing, is towards the end. The thing that happens when you have, especially an addict parent, is you grieve them a long time before they go. Because...
That's nice, yeah.
The last time I technically saw my dad was around Father's Day 2017, which was a few months before he died. And he was not him. It was, it looked like someone impersonating someone that I'd known a very long time ago. It was just this kind of shell of a person. We met at a sushi train, which was our favorite thing to do throughout my whole life, and he was just in complete denial. I thought there was going to be a moment of relief where he said, I've been diagnosed with bipolar. And I said, oh yeah, because in my head I went, I could have diagnosed you with that when I was 10, mate. And And he said, "Oh, but it's all rubbish. It's all rubbish. I can't believe they would think that." And I was like, "Mate, I've woken up in a house with you, and you've stuck knives in all the pot plants." And I think that was when he was clean. Like, I think he was. I was like, you have bipolar, my friend." I just I left feeling not let down, because I was like, yeah, that's the person I've cut contact with and then slowly let in, but with very low expectations for a while. And so I was kind of like, yeah, I didn't really even feel like seeing my dad. The last time I would have, properly really seen my dad, I reckon I would have been about 14, 13. That was the last time he was a person to me. I felt like throughout my later teenage years, I'd really grieved the person that I experienced. And so when he died, it was almost a bit of a relief, because it was like, oh, he's not living in this crazy half alive state. Yeah,
he's
big
suffering
time.
Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
In every way.
He was suffering, I'd go and see him, and I'd because you know what I'm like, I'm pretty blunt, and I'd be sticking at him saying, "Mate, are you effing serious? You're living in a fucking prison cell here." Because his house became a cell.
It became like a hermit.
And in the end, he couldn't even walk. Yeah. He'd put himself in a self-imposed prison. He'd put himself in prison. And that was his punishment, I think, for, because, his house was a shrine to you. And I think it was his way of his punishing himself for not meeting his expectations.
Because
what he wanted
someone
to
being
do.
so intelligent, which is the reason I think he started using drugs in the first place, which is something, it's a huge misconception about people that lose their lives to addiction, is that they're not smart enough. They don't have the means to get better. It's like, no, the reason they started using in the first place, I think Dad grew up in a, small town, a big family that thought he could, he was idolized by his dad and his siblings and his mum. And I think everyone was like, oh, he's going to be brilliant. He's going to be brilliant. But he had mental illness that was unheard of. You can't, especially as a man back then, no one spoke about suffering like that. Everyone said he could do sport. He's dux of his school. He's everything. And then I think he just was battling with the feeling of what do I do with any of this? I'm suffering too much to be this writer that they thought he could have been, to be this. He could have been an amazing lawyer. He could have done anything. And I think he realized that he was going to get it his own way. Didn't know what to do with that. Took drugs to stop thinking about that for a second. And it's just a susceptible personality type where I remember him saying the first time, everyone says the same thing with this, but the first time he took drugs, he was like, that's it. That's going to be a problem for as long as I'm alive.
I remember for me, I thought, I'm going to die an addict. I'm going to die a junkie. I thought I'd found the missing link, the piece that made me whole. And the sad part was it made me a whole lot of nothing, And as you know my story that, I've been clean a long, long time. And I always say, I've never met anyone too stupid to get clean. I've met a lot of people that were too smart. They overthought it. This is a really simple program, if you don't pick up a drug, you can't get stoned. And once you start, you can't stop. So it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
But for you, Edie, you've come through a lot of, suffering and a lot of pain, and you've done remarkably well to do that. Did you do any counselling, or did you do stuff
so
like
when he
that
first went into coma,
you did,
I think through the Children's Hospital, I was doing some counselling just to deal with that. I remember telling them everything that was going on and everything that I'd seen and witnessed and experienced, and this look of horror coming over these people's faces of oh, you're a little 40-year-old in an 8-year-old's body, aren't you? This is a bit creepy how well you're adjusting to this. And then, on and off throughout my life, I think I did that for, 1 or 2 years. And then in high school, when even the most normal of teenagers are depressed, I was very depressed. It took me a long time, and I always knew that sometimes I'd look at Dad and say, whatever he's got, not necessarily the addiction, but definitely like the bipolar aspects, I could see it in him. When I was a teenager, I was like, whatever Dad's got, I've got it in some way, because a lot of the feelings and the like restlessness that he had, I would feel. I remember being really young and telling him like, why do I feel like this? And he's like, I feel like that. So it took a lot of years of different psychologists and different school counselors, and it wasn't always easy. I was really, really lucky that I was super obsessed with performing and music and, performing in musicals and plays, and now doing comedy, that it almost locked me into something that I couldn't jeopardize, which I think, especially like for kids who have the possibility of, having things to be sad about, that maybe you'll end up being quite like self-destructive. I think that is the only thing that saved me. I barely made it through high school anyway. I was still self-destructive. I was super like emotionally explosive and volatile, and I was just sad and, frustrated. I was dealing with, throughout high school, I was dealing with letting go of someone that was basically dying in front of me. It was coming in and out of my life, and it was like felt like a lot of emotional whiplash of like, oh, he's here, now he's not, now he's on drugs, and now he's lying, and now he's not. Yeah. And so, it was very hard, but I was very thankful that my sisters were incredible and were there for me in an incredible way. And my mum was a hard ass in the best way. So many days where she'd literally pull me up by my hands, put my school dress on me, and be like, get out the door. Just put me in the car, close the door, give me the keys and say, you're driving to school, go. And I'd go, which I wouldn't have if no one made me. After Dad died, I'd still been in counselling that year as well, but after Dad died, I started seeing a psychiatrist. Just coincidentally, had to see a new psychiatrist, and I was telling him all about all of this stuff and everything I was going through. Basically ended up getting diagnosed with bipolar, and as soon as he said it, I was like, I know. And I just know they don't really diagnose you with it when you're too young, because any 15-year-old looks like they have bipolar. If you've ever met a 15-year-old.
Yep.
So as soon as he said it, I was like, yeah, I'd believe that. I know a guy. Still, in therapy. You've still got to purge out all of the rubbish that goes in.
Yeah. You touched on family. I think that's so important that, coming from a background where the one parent or both parents or have got issues, and the kids, the siblings seem to have to get tighter. I know your sisters have sort of always been there to rally for you, and the funny part is you've always been there to rally for them too. You don't realise how much you give. You think they're helping you, but you're helping them. I love it when we talk about our family. We say it's complicated.
It's great. I remember I remember us having a conversation at my dad's funeral, which was equally as chaotic as his life. I remember us trying.
Victor Spink standing there and having a piss on the side of the wall when we throwing the ashes in the water.
Went wrong. Then we're trying to let off balloons, and some environment lady's like, "You're gonna kill the turtles." I was like, "My dad just died. I need you to calm down." Brooke went and got biodegradable balloons so we could do it. I promise the turtles are fine. And you know what? I actually don't give a fuck right now. Ask me next week, I'll care about the turtles. Right now, I'm a bit busy. And then I'm pouring the ashes in, and someone's trying to do their bay swim. I'm like, get everyone this. I was like, this is Marty having a laugh at me from beyond the grave. He thinks this is hilarious to cause havoc to me on this day, and it made me feel better, because I was like, of course.
And I remember I told that lady to piss off, then look over, and then Victor's pissing on the wall in the middle of Bondi. I'm like, are you effing serious?
Mayhem.
Like, what's going on here? Yes.
But he wouldn't have had it any other way, and neither would have we.
It was like, oh my God.
He couldn't take anything seriously enough.
In retrospect,
for
yes.
That. But I remember, I was very appreciative of you saying, like, you were very helpful to me at that time. You helped me sell his car, and you were saying, like, sort of like, I've got you under my wing now. And I said, well, Ron, how many children have you got? I don't know, can you take on another one at this point? Oh my gosh, they're multiplying by the second. But
They are.
I know. It's crazy.
There's been 2 more since then.
But yeah, I love the whole, this disjointed family that's started by accident. Oh my gosh.
41 years ago
I
in a
think
rehab.
I'm like, it's a series I'll write one day about the lot of you. But yeah, I love it because I explain who Raven and Josh are to my friends, and I have to say, well, my mum, me and my sisters have a different dad, and their dad has kids with everyone, and those kids are my siblings, but no, they're not really, but they are. And people are like, whatever you say.
You're right.
It is.
I love it when you say to me, it's complicated.
It is. We're all related.
It's complicated. When you're telling the kindergarten that my daughter's niece is coming to pick her up from school, and they go, your daughter's niece? Yeah, she's 18. She can pick up the 3-year-old. And they go, okay, okay, yeah. It's complicated.
Me too.
But it's beautiful. I love our family. And I love you, and I'm really... what are you doing today? Tell us what you're doing today.
My one day off
in your life.
A while. I've been sort of gigging every day almost, which has been great, and it's what I've wanted for a while, but it's a lot. I do stand-up comedy.
So you do stand-up comedy?
I just got an email about I'm doing a Sydney Fringe Festival, like solo comedy show for the first time ever this year, which is very exciting. I don't know the dates off by heart yet, but I'll text them to you. And today I'm sort of just doing some writing, doing some admin. Still doing music. I haven't in a while.
You're doing music?
I'm sort of getting back into it now that I've got a little bit more time. I'm looking after a baby 2 days a week, which is a great job because it's just fun and good soul food, I think.
Yep. It's nice to help other people.
Nice to be around someone young in a, you can give them back.
And you can give them back. You don't even have to cuddle the boyfriend afterwards.
I can, exactly. I don't have to do any of the sleepless nights. I just get there in the morning and say hello.
Yeah,
that's great.
Hey, gorgeous.
Yep, exactly.
Do you want to play and make a mess? I've got to go by.
Yeah. That will. It's been great to talk to you about all this stuff. Love you.
All right, darling. I love you. You be safe. And,
see
I'll see you at Christmas.
Oh, yeah, probably. All right.
I'll see you before that, I hope.
I solemnly swear that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.